Hello, fellow flamenco enthusiasts, and welcome to Everything Flamenco. I'm your host, La Jugo. This is episode 40, and today we're going to continue with the second part of chapter 3 of Prosper Mérimée book, Carmen, on which Georges Bizet also based his opera. Agur lacuna, said she. Oficial mio, you keep guard like a recruit. And before I could find a word in answer, she was inside the house. The whole party was assembled in the patio, and in spite of the crowd, I could see nearly everything that went on through the lattice. I could hear the castanets and the tambourine, the laughter and applause. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of her head as she bounded upward with the tambourine. Then I could hear the officers saying many things to her, which brought the blood to my face. As to her answers, I knew nothing of them. It was on that day, I think, that I began to love her in earnest. For 3 or 4 times I was tempted to rush into the patio and drive my sword into the bodies of all the coxcombs who were making love to her. My torture lasted a full hour. Then the gypsies came out, and the carriage took them away. As she passed me by, Carmen looked at me with those eyes you know, and said to me very low, "Comrade, people who are fond of good frittata come to eat it at Lia's Pastillas at Triana." Then, light as a kid, she stepped into the carriage. The coachman whipped up his mules, and the whole merry party departed, whither I know not. You may fancy that the moment I was off guard, I went to Triana. But first of all, I got myself shaved and brushed myself up as if I had been going on parade. She was living with Lia's Pastilla, an old fried fish seller, a gypsy, as black as a Moor, to whose house a great many civilians resorted to eat frittata, especially, I think, because Carmen had taken up her quarters there. "Lias," she said, as soon as she saw me, "I'm not going to work any more today. Tomorrow will be a day too. Come, fellow countrymen, let us go for a walk." She pulled a mantilla across her nose, and there we were in the street, without my knowing in the least whither I was bound. "Señorita," said I think I have to thank you for a present I had while I was in prison. I've eaten the bread. The file will do for sharpening my lance, and I keep it in remembrance of you. But as for the money, here it is." "Why, he's kept the money!" she exclaimed, bursting out laughing. "But after all, that's all the better, for I'm decidedly hard up. What matter? The dog that runs never starves. Come, let's spend it all. You shall treat." We had turned back to Seville. At the entrance of the Calle de la Serpiente, she bought a dozen oranges, which she made me put into my handkerchief. A little further on, she bought a roll, a sausage, and a bottle of manzanilla. Then, last of all, she turned into a confectioner's shop. There she threw the gold coin I had returned to her on the counter, with another she had in a pocket, and some small silver, and then she asked me for all the money I had. All I possessed was 1 peseta and a few cuartos, which I handed over to her, very much ashamed of not having more. I thought she would have carried away the whole shop. She took everything that was best and dearest. Yemas, turon, preserved fruits, as long as the money lasted. And all these, too, I had to carry in paper bags. Perhaps you know the Calle de Candilejo, when there is a head of Don Pedro the Avenger. That head ought to have given me pause. We stopped at an old house in that street. She passed into the entry and knocked at a door on the ground floor. It was opened by a gypsy, a thorough-paced servant of the devil. Carmen said a few words to her in Romany. At first the old hag grumbled. To smooth it down, Carmen gave her a couple of oranges and a handful of sugar plums, and let her have a taste of wine. Then she hung a cloak on her back and led her to the door, which she fastened with a wooden bar. As soon as we were alone, she began to laugh and caper like a lunatic, singing out, "You are my Rome, I am your Romy." There I stood in the middle of the room, laden with all her purchases and not knowing where I was to put them down. She tumbled them all onto the floor and threw her arms around my neck, saying, "I pay my debts, I pay my debts. That's the law of the Calais." Ah, sir, that day. Oh, that day. When I think of it, I forget what tomorrow must bring me. For a moment the bandit held his peace. Then, when he had relighted his cigar, he began afresh. We spent the whole day together, eating, drinking, and so forth. When she had stuffed herself with sugar plums like any child of 6 years old, she thrust them by handfuls into the old woman's water jar. "That'll make sherbet for her," she said. She smashed the yemas by throwing them against the walls. "They'll keep the flies from bothering us." There was no prank or wild frolic she didn't indulge in. I told her I should have liked to see her dance, only there were no castanets to be had. Instantly she seized the old woman's only earthenware plate, smashed it up, and there she was dancing the romalis, and making the bits of broken crockery rattle as well as if they had been ebony and ivory castanets. That girl was good company, I can tell you. Evening fell, and I heard the drums beating tattoo. "I must get back to quarters for roll call," I said. "To quarters?" she answered with a look of scorn. "Are you a Negro slave to let yourself be driven with a ramrod like that? You're as silly as a canary bird. Your dress suits your nature. Pshaw, you've no more heart than a chicken." I stayed on making up my mind to the inevitable guardroom. The next morning, the first suggestion of parting came from her. "Harkee, Joseito," she said. "Have I paid you? By our law, I owed you nothing because you're a payo. But you're a good-looking fellow, and I took fancy to you. Now we quits. Good day." I asked her when I should see her again. "When you're less of a simpleton," she retorted with a laugh. Then, in a more serious tone, "Do you know, my son, I really believe I love you a little. But that can't last. The dog and the wolf can't agree for long. Perhaps if you turn gypsy, I might care to be your Romy. But that is all nonsense. Such things aren't possible. Pshaw, my boy, believe me, you're well out of it. You've come across the devil. He isn't always black, and you've not had your neck wrung. I wear a woolen suit, but I'm no sheep. Go and burn a candle to your Mahari. She deserves it well. Come, goodbye once more. Don't think any more about La Carmencita, or she'll end by making you marry a widow with wooden legs." As she spoke, she drew back the bar that closed the door, and once we were out in the street, she wrapped a mantilla about her and turned on her heel. She spoke the truth. I should have done far better never to think of her again. But after that day in the Calle del Canilejo, I couldn't think of anything else. All day long I used to walk about, hoping I might meet her. I sought news of her from the old hag and from the fried fish seller. They both told me she had gone away to La Loro, which is their name for Portugal. They probably said it by Carmen's orders, but I soon found out they were lying. Some weeks after my day in the Calle de Canilejo, I was on duty at one of the town gates. A little way from the gate there was a breach in the wall. The masons were working at it in the daytime, and at night a sentinel was posted on it to prevent smugglers from getting in. All through one day I saw Lias Pastia going backward and forward near the guardroom and talking to some of my comrades. They all knew him well, and his fried fish and fritters even better. He came up to me and asked if I had any news of Carmen. "No," said I. "Well," said he, "you'll soon hear of her, old fellow." He was not mistaken. That night I was posted to guard the breach in the wall. As soon as the sergeant had disappeared, I saw a woman coming toward me. My heart told me it was Carmen. Still I shouted, "Keep off! Nobody can pass here." "Now, don't be spiteful," she said, making herself known to me. "What? You here, Carmen? Yes, mi payo. Let us say a few words, but wise ones. Would you like to earn a doro? Some people will be coming with bundles. Let them alone. No, said I. I must not allow them through. These are my orders. Orders? Orders? You didn't think about orders in the Calle de Canilejo. Ah, I cried, quite maddened by the very thought of that night. It was well worthwhile to get my orders for that, but I won't have any smuggler's money. Well, if you won't have money, shall we go and dine together at old Dorothea's? No, said I, half choked by the effort it cost me. No, I can't. Very good. If you make so many difficulties, I know to whom I can go. I'll ask your officer if he'll come with me to Dorothea's. He looks good-natured, and he'll post a cent you'll only see what he had better see. Goodbye, canary bird. I shall have a good laugh the day the order comes out to hang you. I was weak enough to call her back, and I promised to let the whole of gypsydom pass in if that were necessary so that I secured the only reward I longed for. She instantly swore she would keep her word faithfully the very next day, and ran off to summon her friends who were close by. There were 5 of them, of whom Bastia was one, all well loaded with English goods. Carmen kept watch for them. She was to warn them with her castanets the instant she caught sight of the patrol. But there was no necessity for that. The smugglers finished their job in a moment. The next day, I went to the Calle de Canilejo. Carmen kept me waiting, and when she came, she was in rather a bad temper. I don't like people who have to be pressed, she said. You did me a much greater service the first time without knowing you'd gain anything by it. Yesterday you bargained with me. I don't know why I've come, for I don't care for you anymore. Here, be off with you. Here's a duro for your trouble. I very nearly threw the coin at her head, and I had to make a violent effort to prevent myself from actually beating her. After we'd wrangled for an hour, I went off in a fury. For some time I wandered about the town, walking hither and thither like a madman. At last I went into a church, and getting into the darkest corner I could find, I cried hot tears. All at once I heard a voice. A dragoon in tears. I'll make a photo of them. I looked up. There was Carmen in front of me. Well, mi payo, are you still angry with me? She said. I must care for you in spite of myself, for since you left me, I don't know what has been the matter with me. Look you, it is I who ask you to come to the Calle del Candilejo, now. So we made it up. But Carmen's temper was like the weather in our country. The storm is never so close in our mountains as when the sun is at its brightest. She had promised to meet me again at Dorothea's, but she didn't come. And Dorothea began telling me again that she'd gone off to Portugal about some gypsy business. As experience had already taught me how much of that I was to believe, I went about looking for Carmen wherever I thought she might be. And 20 times in every day I walked through the Calle de Canilejo. One evening I was with Dorothea, whom I had almost tamed by giving her a glass of anisette now and then, when Carmen walked in, followed by a young man, a lieutenant in our regiment. Get away at once, she said to me in Basque. I stood there, dumbfounded, my heart full of rage. What are you doing here? Said the lieutenant to me. Take yourself off. Get out of this. I couldn't move a step. I felt paralyzed. The officer grew angry, and seeing I did not go out and had not even taken off my forage cap, he caught me by the collar and shook me roughly. I don't know what I said to him. He drew his sword, and I unsheathed mine. The old woman caught hold of my arm, and the lieutenant gave me a wound on the forehead, of which I still bear the scar. I made a step backward, and with one jerk of my elbow, I threw Dorothea down. Then, as the lieutenant still pressed me, I turned the point of my sword against his body, and he ran upon it. Then Carmen put out the lamp and told Dorothea in her own language to take to flight. I fled into the street. myself and began running along. I knew not whither. It seemed to me that someone was following me. When I came to myself, I discovered that Carmen had never left me. "Oh, great stupid of a canary bird," she said. "You never make anything but blunders. And indeed, I told you I should bring you bad luck. But come, there's a cure for everything when you have a Fleming from Rome for your love. Begin by rolling this handkerchief around your head and throw me over that belt of yours. Wait for me in this alley. I'll be back in 2 minutes." She disappeared, and soon came back bringing me a striped cloak which she had gone to fetch, I knew not whence. She made me take off my uniform and put on the cloak over my shirt. Thus dressed, and with the wound on my head bound round with a handkerchief, I was tolerably like a Valencian peasant, many of whom came to Seville to sell a drink they make out of chufas. Then she took me to a house very much like Dorothea's at the bottom of a little lane. Here she and another gypsy woman washed and dressed my wounds, better than any army surgeon could have done, gave me something, I know not what, to drink, and finally made me lie down on a mattress on which I went to sleep. Probably the woman had mixed one of the soporific drugs of which they know the secret in my drink, for I did not wake up till very late the next day. I was rather feverish and had a violent headache. It was some time before the memory of the terrible scene in which I had taken part on the previous night came back to me. After having dressed my wound, Carmen and her friend, squatting on their heels beside my mattress, exchanged a few words of chipekai, which appeared to me to be something in the nature of a medical consultation. Then they both of them assured me that I should soon be cured, but that I must get out of Seville at the earliest possible moment. For that, if I was caught there, I should most undoubtedly be shot. "My boy," said Carmen to me, "you'll have to do something. Now that the king won't give you either rice or haddock, you'll have to think of earning your livelihood. You're too stupid for stealing a pastesas. But you are brave and active. If you have the pluck, take yourself off to the coast and turn smuggler. Haven't I promised to get you hanged? That's better than being shot, and besides, if you set about it properly, you live like a prince as long as the Minons and the Coast Guard don't lay their hands on your collar." In this attractive guise did this fiend of a girl describe the new careers she was suggesting to me, the only one, indeed, remaining now I had incurred the penalty of death. "Shall I confess it, sir?" She persuaded me without much difficulty. This wild and dangerous life, it seemed to me, would bind her and me more closely together. In future, I thought, I should be able to make sure of her love. I had often heard talk of certain smugglers who travelled about Andalusia, each riding a good horse, with his mistress behind him and his blunderbuss in his fist. Already I saw myself trotting up and down the world with a pretty gypsy behind me. When I mentioned that notion to her, she laughed till she had to hold her sides and vowed there was nothing in the world so delightful as a night spent camping in the open air when each Rom retired with his Romy beneath a little tent made of 3 hoops with a blanket thrown across them. "If I take to the mountains," I said to her, "I shall be sure of you. There'll be no lieutenant there to go shares with me." "You're jealous," she retorted. "So much the worse for you. How can you be such a fool as that? Don't you see I must love you because I've never asked you for money?" When she said that sort of thing, I could have strangled her. And that was the end of part 2 of chapter 3. We will continue next week, as we do, if you are still listening, I hope. And I will see you for part 3 of chapter 3 next week. Ole!